Hello everybody, and welcome to today's video where we'll be discussing 3 different principles that we can use in our lessons to help reduce extraneous processing for our students. The first principle that we'll be covering today is the signaling principle. The idea behind the signaling principle is to use visual or auditory cues to help draw the learner's attention towards the content we want them to focus on. This helps cut down on extraneous processing by pointing the learner's attention towards where we want it to be, as opposed to them kind of having to figure out where their focus has to go. It's a really great way to point them towards keywords, key sentences, pictures, anything like that that you're focusing on in the moment. The next principle we'll be going over is the redundancy principle. The idea behind the redundancy principle is that we really don't want to be narrating exactly what is up on screen in our presentations or what is in our notes that we're giving to students. We want those to be separate. So as a quick example, we don't want to read word for word what's up on screen. We might just want to deliver our main lesson verbally while we put key pieces of information up on screen. This essentially makes it so students don't have to use twice as much processing in their brains for both visual and auditory content that is more or less the same. Our third principle is the coherence principle. The big idea behind the coherence principle is to remove any visual or auditory material that does not directly pertain to our lesson. This could be any loosely linked stories or ideas that could be interesting, but they don't really directly hit on our learning objectives or what we want students to get out of the lesson. It just becomes extra information that students then need to process on top of the intrinsic load processing information we want them to focus on. So it's really like extra pictures, too much text, anything like that that we can cut out of our lesson so students can laser focus on what we want them to focus on is just going to be beneficial to them over the course of whatever lessons that we're teaching. To give everybody an example of how we can use these 3 principles in practice, I've prepared a very short lesson to teach third-person narrative point of view to students. So please follow on with the lesson and see if you can pick out where I am using these principles. So when we look at third-person narrative point of view, we have to use certain pronouns to help us identify if it is third person. It is important to note that with third-person point of view, we have to make sure there is an absence of pronouns that help identify first person and second person. If these pronouns were to show up, then the point of view of this story is likely going to be first person or second person. But if we are reading outside the dialogue and we see pronouns such as he, she, they, them being used, then this novel that we're reading is likely going to be third person point of view. Now there are 3 different types of third person points of view, which is very different from first and second. And the first one we'll be going over is third person objective. Third person objective point of view isn't used a whole lot in fictional literature, so we won't see it too much in our class novels, but it is used a lot in things like, say, news writing. Third person objective point of view is where you have a narrator that doesn't really know the thoughts and ideas of any characters in the story. They only know what they themselves can observe as an outside source. So this could be, for example, in news, somebody interviewing people to get them to tell them what their ideas are. Outside of objective, we have limited and omniscient, and these are the 2 that are used a whole lot in our fictional literature. First, let's focus on limited. A third-person limited narrator is very similar to a first-person narrator in that the third-person limited narrator only knows the thoughts and feelings of one character, which is typically going to be the main character. They can tell us what they're thinking and feeling, just like a first-person narrator can tell us what they're thinking and feeling, but they are limited to only that one character. This is compared to third-person omniscient, whereas in third-person omniscient, the narrator can know the thoughts and feelings of 2 or more characters. This can be maybe there's 2 protagonists in the story, so they share the thoughts and feelings of both those characters, or maybe they know the thoughts and feelings of all the main characters and the protagonist and some of the side characters, and it can really go on and on and on and on. It's just 2 or more. Alright, so let's see if you can identify the 3 principles I used in this short lesson that I just taught. You probably noticed that I was using red lines and boxes to help signal important pieces of information that I was talking about, or to help signal the topics that I was talking about with students. Instead of students having to look around the entire slide, they knew exactly where I was at and where I wanted them to look. You can also notice that there wasn't any additional content in there other than what I wanted. This helped follow the idea that I don't want them to be focusing on too much outside content. And then finally, you notice that I wasn't just reading straight from those slides, right? I had the lesson that I wanted to teach in my mind, and I had the very important specific pieces of information that students needed to focus on in the lesson. All right? So hopefully you can take all these ideas and apply them to your own lessons, and hopefully I see you all in the next video. Thank you for stopping by.